Story 1. The Ghost of the Wood Island Lighthouse. It started as a simple plan. Sail out to Wood Island, film the old lighthouse for my channel, tell the local ghost story, and call it a day. I had no idea it would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. The locals warned me. I remember the old man at the dock, his face weathered like the sea, saying, "People don't come back from that island the same." I laughed it off. It was just a lighthouse after all. But from the moment my boat touched the island's shore, I felt it. Something was wrong. The air there was heavy, colder than it should have been for late summer. The sky was clear, the sun was out, but I couldn't shake the chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I told myself it was just nerves. I was about to film a horror story after all. There's supposed to be a little atmosphere, right? The walk to the lighthouse was short, but the silence made it feel like hours. There was no wind, no birds, just the sound of my boots crunching over the rocks. Then faintly, I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible groan, like the sound of someone in pain. It was coming from somewhere up ahead. I stopped, straining my ears. There it was again, a little louder this time. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Probably just the wind. As I approached the lighthouse, I started filming. I narrated the history of the place, how in 1896, a man named Howard Hobbs had murdered his landlord in a drunken rage. When the authorities came to arrest him, he holed up in the lighthouse where he shot himself. Ever since, people have reported strange happenings on the island, ghostly figures, eerie sounds, the feeling of being watched. I tried to stay professional, but the deeper I went into the lighthouse, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. Every step I took echoed louder than it should have, like there was someone following just behind me. I spun around more than once, but there was no one. My flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. The air inside was thick, so thick it felt like I was wading through it. It smelled of salt water and something else, something metallic and sharp. Blood, maybe. I made my way up the spiral staircase. As I climbed, the groaning noise grew louder, more insistent. I gripped the railing tighter, telling myself it was just the wind through the old building. Then, at the top of the stairs, I saw him. A figure stood in front of the narrow window, his back to me. He was wearing what looked like old, tattered clothing, the kind someone might have worn 100 years ago. His hair was wild, and his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but there he was, as real as I was. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, the figure turned slowly, like he was made of stone. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. But it was his eyes, dark, empty sockets where his eyes should have been. He stared right at me, as if he could see into my soul. And then he moved. He took one slow step toward me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it down the stairs or out of the lighthouse. The next thing I knew, I was back at the shore, fumbling to get the boat started. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the controls. As I sped away, I looked back at the island one last time, and I swear, standing at the top of the lighthouse, was that same figure, watching me go. I never went back. I tried to edit the footage, but it was corrupted, static, glitches like something didn't want me to show what I'd seen. And sometimes late at night, I can still hear that groan in my ears. It's like he's waiting for me to come back. Story 2. The Curse of Dudleytown. We thought it would be a fun adventure. I mean, who doesn't love exploring an abandoned town in the middle of the woods? Dudleytown was one of those places you hear about, but no one really knows what happened. Some people say it's cursed, others say it's just a bunch of old ruins. But we wanted to see for ourselves. We set out early, a group of 5 of us, armed with backpacks, flashlights, and cameras. The hike-in wasn't too bad at first, just a long walk through the trees. But the deeper we went, the quieter it got. I didn't notice it at first, but eventually, the usual sounds of the forest disappeared. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the wind. It was like we'd stepped into another world, one where sound didn't exist. By the time we reached what was left of Dudleytown, the silence was oppressive. The place was a mess of overgrown foundations, crumbling stone walls, and trees that seemed to grow right out of the remains of old houses. I started to feel uneasy. There was something wrong about this place. It was more than just the silence. It was the way the air felt, thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest. We split up to explore, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting between the trees. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then one of my friends, Sam, said he saw something too. A figure standing just beyond the tree line watching us. We all laughed it off, trying to keep things light. "Just your mind playing tricks," one of the others said. But as the sun started to set, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder and the shadows longer. That's when we started hearing the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible. I thought it was just the wind, but the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't. It was voices. Low, murmuring voices like a group of people whispering just out of earshot. The others heard it too. We tried to joke about it, but no one was laughing anymore. Sam was the first to panic. He swore he saw someone, a man, standing among the trees, his eyes glowing in the twilight. We all turned to look, but there was nothing there. Still, the feeling of being watched never went away. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were calling our names. That's when we decided to leave. We gathered our stuff and started heading back toward the trail. But something felt wrong. The forest seemed darker, the trees closer together. I felt like we were being followed. Every few minutes I'd turn around, sure I'd see someone standing there just beyond the trees. But there was never anyone. Then, about halfway back, we realized someone was missing. Tyler. We called his name, searched the area, but he was gone. It didn't make any sense. He was right there with us. But now he'd vanished. His flashlight, his bag, everything was still there, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in. We searched for hours, but it was like he'd been swallowed by the woods. We had no choice but to leave without him. When we got back to town, we told the police everything, but they didn't find anything. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Nothing. It's been months now, and Tyler's still missing. I can't stop thinking about those whispers and the figure in the trees. Sometimes I hear the whispers in my sleep, calling my name, just like they called Tyler's. I wonder if the curse of Dudleytown isn't just a story. Maybe it's real. Maybe the town didn't die, it just waits, pulling people in one by one. Story 3. The Haunting of Mercy Brown. I'd always been fascinated by the Mercy Brown legend. Growing up in Rhode Island, you hear about it in school, from your parents, from the locals. They say she was a vampire, and that her spirit still haunts the cemetery where she was buried. I'd always wanted to see it for myself. So one evening, right before sunset, I drove out to Chestnut Hill Cemetery. The place was eerie enough in daylight, an old, overgrown graveyard with crumbling headstones and tall, twisting trees that blocked out most of the light. By the time I got there, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. I found Mercy's grave easily. It's the one everyone comes to see. A simple stone with her name, Mercy Lena Brown, etched into the worn granite. I stood there for a while thinking about the story. In 1892, Mercy's family had been dying, one by one, of tuberculosis. Her mother, her sisters, all dead. When Mercy died, she was buried in the middle of winter, and her father George was left with only one son. But when that son fell ill, the townspeople convinced George that Mercy might be to blame. They believed she was a vampire, feeding on her family from beyond the grave. So they dug her up. They found her body strangely well preserved, especially for someone who had been dead for months. Her heart was still fresh. The townspeople, terrified, cut out her heart and liver, burned them, and mixed the ashes into a tonic, which they made George's sick son drink, hoping it would break the curse. But it didn't save him. He died shortly after. Standing there at her grave, I couldn't help but wonder how much of the story was true. The rational part of me knew it was just superstition, a desperate act by people who didn't understand disease. But the air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. The sun had fully set now, and the cemetery was cloaked in shadow. I stood there, staring at Mercy's gravestone, feeling the weight of the legend hanging over me. That's when I felt it. A cold breeze, sharp and sudden, like someone had opened a door to winter. I turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the cemetery was empty. Still, the chill didn't go away. In fact, it got worse, settling deep into my bones. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it didn't help. The wind picked up, and with it came a faint sound, almost like a whisper, so quiet I could barely make it out. I froze, straining to hear it. It wasn't words exactly, more like a soft moaning, drifting through the trees. The sound made my skin crawl. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I took a step back, glancing around the dark cemetery. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, and my heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was time to go. I'd seen enough. But just as I turned to leave, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just the way the moonlight filtered through the trees. But no. There, standing by the edge of the cemetery, was a figure. A woman, dressed in what looked like an old, tattered white gown. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair hung in long, dark waves around her face. She wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a local playing a prank, someone who knew about the legend and wanted to scare tourists. But something about her, it wasn't right. Her eyes, they were glowing. A faint, eerie glow, like two pale orbs, staring right into me. I backed up slowly, my legs trembling. My brain screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The woman raised her hand, pointing at me. Her mouth opened, and a soft, raspy voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come." That was enough. I turned and bolted, running faster than I ever thought possible. I could feel her eyes on me, watching as I stumbled over gravestones and roots, desperate to get to my car. I didn't stop running until I reached the gate. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I slammed the door shut and sped away, not daring to look back. For days I couldn't shake the image of her, those glowing eyes, the way she pointed at me. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. But then, the dream started. Every night I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing because in my dreams, she was always there. Standing at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting. The worst part is, it doesn't feel like a dream anymore. I've seen her again, out of the corner of my eye, just a fleeting glimpse in the shadows. And every time I hear that same whisper in the back of my mind. You shouldn't have come. I don't know what Mercy Brown was or if the stories about her being a vampire were true, but I do know one thing. I should have listened to the warnings. Because now, wherever I go, whatever I do, I feel her. And one day I know she's going to catch up to me.